Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Grid Talk podcast. I'm your host, Tom Horrox, and today I will be having a fireside chat with Stuart Codling, aka Codders from Autosport. We had a very amusing chat about his recent book, as well as fascinating insight into testing and the season ahead. But before Stuart joins us, we must thank our sponsor for this episode, Bet Online. Bet Online is the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for all betting in 2025. Whether you're a seasoned fan or a first-time bettor, Bet Online is your ultimate game day companion. With the largest selection of odds on everything from NBA and college basketball to the NHL, UFC, Bet Online continues to be your number one source for sports betting. From every three-pointer to hat trick, Bet Online has you covered with odds, stats, and more for every game, every play, and every win. Bet Online. The game starts here. So, without further ado, let's have a chat with Stuart Codling. Welcome, everyone, to the first fireside chat of the 2025 season. And today, very happy to welcome Stuart Codling to the podcast here, author of many books and senior writer at Autosport, and also writer of many bad puns. But as a new dad myself, very much appreciate the puns, and I often recycle them as well. So thank you for your contribution to my wife's insanity, and welcome to the podcast, Stuart.
Do you know, you wouldn't be the only one. One of my colleagues, Alex Kalinauckas, his girlfriend really, really can't stand him recycling my joke about we'll meet at Sean Connery's favourite sport, tennis.
Yes,
He's
yes.
banned.
I've not used that one myself, but yeah, I've heard that one a few times. Yeah, but yeah, so we're here today because you've brought a book out, which I'm going to hold up for the YouTube viewers there. Fantastic book, obviously with the shirt that I'm wearing. You'll notice that it's very much up my street. McLaren Formula One car by car, so it's every car since 1966. It's yeah, I mean, why? First question, I guess, would be why McLaren? Why an anthology of cars?
Well, that's a very easy question to kick off with. I'd written a book called Ferrari Formula One Car by Car, which sold very well. My publishers were very pleased with it. I really enjoyed writing it. It was delayed slightly because we finished it in early 2020. And then I don't know if you remember, there was a bit of a bug going round. So the world stopped for a bit.
Oh
And
yes, the cold. Yes, I remember that. Yeah.
yeah, as I sit here before you with a terrible cough, probably through freezing my bits off at the Williams launch last week. Yeah, so it got delayed for a bit. We had to shoehorn another chapter in to for the 2020 car at the end, but it came out. It was a big hit. Most people liked it, and so they said, would you like to do another? Who do you think would be suitable? And the obvious candidate for that was McLaren, because you have the history, also a great deal of success, but also a lot of fantastic stories, lots of different eras. So it just made sense to do it. And also, I have a very good relationship with McLaren. When I was a freelancer, I used to do a bit of work for them. And I was assisted in the completion of the book by none other than Neil Oakley, who very kindly offered to read through it and check for egregious errors and stupidities. And fortunately, there weren't too many. So it's not an official book, but it does have a semi-official stamp of approval, shall we say.
Fantastic. Yeah, I mean, I'm just flicking through it. There's some incredible pictures in here. Like it's yeah, they're just it's really great for me as a podcaster from the school of people who don't read good. It really does sit well with me. But I mean, how do you go about sourcing all these? I'm assuming it's not just there are 50 nights on Google just downloading stuff. I mean, how do you get all these? I mean, there's just so many incredible pictures in here.
A lot of the pictures, the studio ones, are by James Mann, who great photographer. He has his own kind of portable studio, and he actually went to he had a residency, so not quite as long as Peter Kay at the O2.
Hmm.
He wasn't ejected, unlike some of Peter Kay's guests. So he had a few days at the McLaren Technology Centre, set up his sort of little studio there with the black background and the lights and whatnot, and just rolled cars in, rolled them out, and did a load of them. So he had quite an extensive library of studio images we could use. And then there's just so much racing imagery on motorsport images. You can just really go down a rabbit hole and spend all day looking through stuff. So it's just a question of picking the right images and also structuring the book. What you
Mm.
don't see, the glossy book you hold in your hand is the swan gliding across the surface. What you don't see is, the legs paddling furiously underneath. All these books have a structure. You have a certain number of pages to play with, and basically you have a master spreadsheet with how many pages you can devote to cars. So you then subdivide how many cars have you got to fit into the book, what are the more significant cars, and then through that you decide which car is going to have how many pages, and that dictates how many words you've got. So there's an awful lot of faffing around with spreadsheets, not quite as much as with the Ferrari book because there are slightly fewer McLarens, given that didn't enter Formula One until 1966. So
Mm.
there were fewer battles to fight with the publisher about fitting stuff in than there was with the Ferrari book, where there were some people who didn't realize that the name 312 covered several different cars and couldn't just be got rid of in over 4 pages.
Mm. So, did you have any issues with that with the McLaren book? Because I know you have quite a lot of carryover, and was there anything like that where you really had to fight with the publishers about no, this car absolutely has to have 3 pages? Or
No, they totally trusted me to do it right. They didn't even question my inclusion of the Adrian Newey car that never actually raced, which I thought I'd get hauled over the coals by some of the more pedantic readers, who, particularly the people in the Ferrari book, there was one Ferrari that didn't actually race in a Grand
mm,
Prix. It was one of the 1950 cars, one of
mm,
the intermediate V12 engine things before they got to 4.5 liters,
mm.
which we decided to wrap into another car, mainly because no pictures existed of it as well.
Ah,
So there's a couple of snotty reviews on Amazon from people who say there's always someone who thinks you've made a mistake and they've caught
mm,
you at it. Actually, it was a deliberate decision. We didn't want to fudge it, but we had to. Yeah, nothing like that in the McLaren book. I wanted to include that car because the it, it it was recycled into the car that followed. Some people said they just scratched the 18 out on the chassis
mm,
plate and wrote a 19 or whatever.
mm.
So much of it fed into the next one that it was an important part of the story. So we had to feature it. And interestingly, that was the only car that Neil Oakley slightly harumphed about my original description about it and said, well, this isn't quite how it happened.
Yeah, I did notice the 18 was in there. Actually, that's one thing that did jump out at me. That's very much the time period where I became a big McLaren fan, and sort of late 90s into sort of the start of the Lewis Hamilton era was the time when I was
Yeah.
following McLaren. I just the West livery. Basically, anything in that silver and chrome, I just absolutely adored. So, bringing back lots of memories, seeing the original '98 car, and obviously that feeding into what's happened this year as well. It's a really good time to do a McLaren book. Is there any part of you that wanted to do it again, like the Ferrari book, a year later, just to feed in a championship winner at the end?
It would have been nice, wouldn't it? Because if you think working on a monthly magazine is stately progress and there are deadlines and stuff like that, and when I edited GP Racing magazine, you would finish it on a Tuesday and it wouldn't appear on the newsstands until a week and a half later. So every step of each issue's conception was was done with the knowledge that that was how it was going to be. You had to build this inertia into your planning so that you weren't made a fool of by the final product. Book publishing is so much slower even than that.
Mm,
So with with the way it was done, it was the I think the 2023 car.
mm,
Let's just say that as the book was being written, the sort of middle of 2023, things were sort of changing, and I was kind of worried about how it was going to pan out. So it was literally just before the book went to press, they applied the big upgrade in Singapore, and I said, can I change the entry of that car, because things have changed, and if we don't change it, we're going to look a bit stupid. So
Mm.
fortunately, the presses were halted briefly. No small children were harmed in the making of it. Uh, it's not like the Victorian cotton mills where the children had to run in and stop the machines and clean them while they were operating.
Mm.
And it all panned out okay. But yeah, it is tricky when you want to have that benefit of hindsight, and there's literally months between you finishing the book and it going out onto the shelves. And in
Mm.
those months, things can change, and it can leave you looking very foolish indeed.
It just that brings back memories actually from when I was younger, and I used to have these audio tapes that were based around Formula One drivers that I would listen to, and it was. I'm going somewhere with this, trust me. But there was things about Ayrton Senna and all that kind of era. But then the last one in the series was Mika Hakkinen, and it finished on her F97, and it
Yeah.
finished with them saying, "And finally, he was a winner." I'm just like, and I was listening to this in like 1999. I'm like, yeah, okay, yeah. Should have maybe waited 6 months on that one,
Yeah.
but
I think you'd be safe if you did an audio tape about Lance Stroll not winning.
well, you never know with Adrian Newey there. Now he could end up finally winning a race, but I'm just desperately hoping that that doesn't happen. I'm not neutral. I don't have to be neutral. You do, but I don't have to be neutral. So yeah, I don't want him to become this one of these like amazing car, right place, right time, race winner or world champions. It would just sully the sport for me, to be honest. For me, I just it's fine. Like he's a decent driver, and you know he can do well, but yeah, now we're going very off topic here because we're talking about Lance Stroll and the podcast
Sorry,
about
that's
a
me.
McLaren
I
book.
always
No,
go off
that's
on a
fine.
tandem. Yeah.
That's absolutely fine. But so I'm assuming the all the knowledge and information in this book you didn't just recall from memory, as our pre-show chat talking about our memory is not great. So when researching this book, what was the most interesting thing that you discovered that you just thought, didn't know that, or that was quite interesting?
The I had a lot of good reference material. Doug Nye's book about historic McLaren Formula One Can-Am Indy cars, very great resource. Uh,
Mm.
it ends in the mid 80s, of course. I used contemporary reports a lot, and then
Mm.
I did reach out to a lot of people who were involved. Obviously, these things are primary sources, so some people have a bit of an axe to grind. Hence, my little the chuntering moment with Neil Oakley, because my big source with the 18 section was Alex Verts, who
Mm.
was the man who was driving it when it underwent rapid unscheduled disassembly, and
Yeah,
he
poor
phoned
guy.
Martin Whitmarsh to say, I'm not driving this car again. It's not happening. So, I, yeah, some of the background to that car was very interesting. They were trying stuff with aero elasticity that was really pushing the science of the time, the
Mm.
material science particularly. And so it was kind of doomed not to work. And then there were other bits. It had a fundamental aerodynamic flaw, which the committee that was set up at the time to oversee engineering couldn't agree on how to fix, and Newey saw it one way, the others saw another small thing that Neil Oakley disagreed with. So you kind of get to an accurate picture by hearing as many voices as you can. But yeah, there's some fascinating stories in that.
Fantastic. Yeah, I mean, it's just looking for it. There's just so much in there. I mean, for something to find something for every single car from the '60s all the way through is incredible. And the tech specs in there, how accurate are they? Or did you have to contact the engineers for the teams to get those tech specs?
Oh, the tech specs are always a nightmare because, when you check up on them, there's so many different accounts out there that sometimes it really is very hard to find stuff. So you really have to check and double check, going back to primary sources, and don't trust the internet, especially now. There's so much AI generated nonsense out there. For instance, we're going slightly off topic again now, I warn
Mhm.
you. I wrote a thing about one of the mid 70s. No, I didn't actually. I was editing a thing about the mid 70s 30s and doing the tech spec for it and trying to work out what its rear suspension configuration was. So because I was working from home, I initially had a quick Google check. I found myself with this bizarre site that claimed that John Surtees won the world championship in one of his own cars in 1976. I kind of thought, this never happened. What parallel universe madness is this? And I'm afraid that's what we're going to get with more AI generated content. We are going to have to rely increasingly on primary sources from Tom's Purdue because everything on the internet is just going to be hallucination and madness.
Yes, the internet's toilet door, Wikipedia, is probably the most reliable source we can get nowadays. After so much other stuff that goes out there now, it's insane. But yeah, so looking back for there, obviously there's say from the 60s all the way through to modern day. What did you find? Were there any cars that were particularly difficult to write about that you just thought, oh, what am I going to write about this heap of junk?
Fortunately, it being McLaren, the answer was no. Even the really, really terrible cars, the second era of Honda, um, there were lots of stories there. For space considerations, we had to make those entries a bit smaller, so they're only sort of spread entries, and that actually made it even more challenging to kind of condense the story because it was such a soap opera. Just sort of 10 years ago, the return of Honda and the acrimony that broke out, just squeezing that into the space allowed was quite challenging. So no, there was never any point where I was scrabbling about for anything to write. It was more a case of what you had to leave out and that terror you have of it going out to market and the snide reviews on Goodreads and
Mm.
Amazon. Well, the author has forgotten to mention such and such. Didn't mention what jumper Mika Hakkinen was wearing as he walked into the paddock, which is the bane of every author's life.
Yes. Well, actually, that's a good point. I'm glad you mentioned Mika Hakkinen because he did the foreword for the book, didn't he? That must have been how did you get him to do that? I'm assuming, given that it's McLaren, he was probably quite willing. He's quite a amenable guy, isn't he?
Oh yeah, he was, and he was very very pleased to do it. The contact was very easy because he does a lot of work in conferences and motivational speaking with a guy called Mark Gallagher, who I used to record a podcast with. So Mark facilitated the contact. Mika was delighted, and we've sort of kept in touch by proxy ever since. It was quite funny. A couple of do you remember when there was the Russian state hack? Oh, sorry, Chinese a French plane filed the wrong flight plan and basically it destroyed air traffic all across Europe because
Mm.
it wasn't a state hack. It was someone glitched a machine. My wife and I were actually in Madeira at the time and supposed to fly back that day, and um, got stuck there. And I was sort of messaging Mark about it, saying, "God, you wouldn't believe this." And he mentioned it to Mika, and apparently Mika said, "Well, why didn't he hire a private jet?" How the
Of
other
course,
half
Mika.
live, eh?
Yeah, of course, Mika. Of course, yeah, yeah. Like, why don't you just buy a bigger house? Oh,
Yeah,
so
invent time travel, instantaneous matter teleportation.
yeah, yeah. Why not? Come on. It's been in Star Trek since the '60s. Why haven't we got that yet? So obviously, so that's great that there was nothing difficult to write about there. But was there any cars that you were just like, I'm sorry, but I need like a chapter for this car because there's just so much to talk about. I mean, potentially aside from the MP480.
Yeah, the things. I think the M23 is one that had such a long service life that you kind of thought, how can I do this car justice, even in the biggest page allocation we had for a car? That was quite tricky because it had so many drivers, went through so many iterations that it was quite challenging to package all that up because it's very easy when you're doing these chapters to go into a little bit too much detail early on, and then you get to the end of you sort of get towards the end of your word allocation, and you're slapping the keys, doing it in a massive sort of how do I squeeze all this in? And eventually you have to come back to the beginning and delete all those hard-won details and compress all that so that you've got more room for things to breathe later on. And that I think is the most challenging part of writing a book like this, because you could just write and write, and it is about what you take out.
It's a great coffee table book. It's definitely going to be in my living room, and yeah, just whenever the in-laws are around and they're boring me watching Michael McIntyre, I'll just be flicking through this and trying not to look too disinterested. But how's the feedback been? Because it's been out for a little while now, hasn't it?
Yeah, it's been very well reviewed. The McLaren fan community likes it, which is very good. I was very pleased by, because the McLaren fan community very active in the UK. I'm always running into them. Just leaving the Autosport Awards the other week, who should I run into but Sarah Merritt and a guy called Simon, who are at everything. And if they were annoyed with the book, I would hear about it.
Mm.
So it's good that people like that are pleased, because it's people like that who not only are the natural constituency of people who buy a book, but they are the keepers of the McLaren flame. They've been with the team through thick and thin. Because in many respects, Formula One, some people decry it for being a little bit like football in terms of fan allegiances, but actually, football, you pick a team and stick with them generally through thick and thin. And Formula One seems to be like that as well. Some people are fans of individual drivers, but particularly Ferrari, Williams, McLaren, people are fans of teams and stick with it even through the historic stupidities. And every team has its spasms of stupidity, doesn't it? And those really low moments where
Mm.
you think it can't get any worse. McLaren, all those engine penalties where Fernando Alonso at the Belgian Grand Prix should probably have been starting at the Nürburgring or maybe in Monza.
Yes, absolutely. But so we're now on the eve of the 2025 season. We've got I'm not sure exactly when this is going to be going out, but we're recording this the week before testing starts in Bahrain. So what do you think that you would be writing about the 2025 McLaren if you were still writing this book in a year's time?
Well, there's a lot that's different under the skin, and it's an evolutionary car. So it's actually it's quite a tricky one, because if I were writing this book to come out next year, I'd be having to write this chapter now based on what they've shown at
Mm.
Silverstone the other week, and then going cap in hand to the publishers to change it partway through as they develop it. The one thing I would say about this car is that it is as close to being definitive as any Formula One car is going to be at the start of a season, because there will come a point this year when the taps have to turn off, either gradually or suddenly,
Mm.
and teams are going to have to pivot towards developing the 2026 car. So they've all got their 2026 projects in motion already.
So looking forward then, hypothetically, or a wish list as well, what would be your next book in an ideal world?
Well, actually, I'd have to kill you. No, the my publishers want to do an update of the Ferrari book, so that is happening at some point. We'll find out. I'm one of three authors of a 75th anniversary of Formula One book that is coming out in a couple of months, I think. I might be doing another car by car about another team, but
Can I
the
make a guess? You don't have to answer, but I'm going to guess it's Williams. But carry on.
well, that was one of the ones I suggested. It might not be the one we actually do, but yes, it
Okay.
would have to be something historic and uh, something where there's a bit of differentiation between the cars. So,
Mm.
can you imagine doing a Red Bull book because they all look the same? Anyway,
Mm.
no. Judging by Christian Horner's reception at the season launch, I don't think it would sell.
Not in the
There,
UK, no.
no, no. There's also my oh dear, it's very odd. My wife hates it. The some of my books have been translated into all sorts of languages. I think
Oh
if
no.
I have a little wander here, you can have a look at this thing. Uh, yes, I've got no idea what. that language is, but my Drive to Survive book is in it. And very nice of my publisher to send me copies, but I don't know what to do with them. And my wife goes,
Mm.
"Oh, great, another book." What else is on? Yeah, I've been asked to collaborate with someone who's quite famous in motor racing to do their autobiography,
Okay.
but they want to do it through a mainstream publisher. So I'm having to talk to agents.
No.
Oh yeah, so I haven't yet got to the stage of doing Richard E. Grant in with Nell and I and say, well, kiss 10% of the arses for me then. But it may just come to pass. So yeah, we're trying to sell that into a mainstream publisher. So who knows? Formula One's quite big nowadays. Some of my former colleagues who've written books have agents. Luke Smith's got two agents.
Two.
Two agents.
Oh
Yeah.
dear. Well, yeah, that's. I guess it's the signs of the times. As the profile of Formula One is so big now, and some of me, part of me, actually kind of misses the olden days where if you saw someone in a Formula One shirt, there would be a nod of appreciation as you walk past them because that's the only person you've seen wearing a Formula One shirt in the last 10 years. And I kind of, in some ways, I
Yeah.
quite miss that element of it. But then when I was sitting in a cafe and I heard there was the typical mums clucking brigade, talking about putting the world to rights with their kids there and like 7 or 8 mothers. They're all talking about Formula One. I'm just like, this is great. Like this reaching a completely new audience as well. And my wife enjoys Formula One, which is great because she didn't when we met. So this is great. I mean, she's a Max Verstappen fan, which doesn't go down well.
Oh
But
dear, oh dear.
yes,
Yeah.
I know. But yeah, it's the whole profile completely changed, and as a result, people like yourself are much more in demand, I suppose. But this podcast has actually been the longest podcast in history because eagle-eyed YouTubers will probably notice that certain things have changed in the background. We try to keep continuity as close as possible. But we are actually resuming 10 days later due to my internet service provider cutting us off and their inability to plug in a cable delayed us. There was a bit of illness and then a small matter of cars driving around in circles in the Middle East, which also delayed us. So looking back at the looking forward to the 2025 season, which is now almost upon us, what do you think will be the most book-worthy subject to write about in the 2025 season?
Well, I don't know. The ongoing saga of whether Aston Martin team principal and CEO Andy Cowell can actually be persuaded to speak the name of Enrico Cardile, who of course was recruited eons ago to be their chief technical officer or whatever, has been on gardening leave for a long time. And look how many technical restructures have happened while he's been attending to his gladioli. So he must be wondering what's going on. In the press conference at testing, Andy wouldn't speak his name, wouldn't commit to a start date. So I wonder if he's pulled out. So that's a will he, won't he?
Wow.
Obviously, Christian Horner's WhatsApp messages could swim back up out of the toilet bowl and bite him or us. It's going to be an interesting season. Certainly going to be tight in the midfield, and probably the development taps will have to be gradually turned off on 2025 development quite early as everyone pivots towards 2026. So yeah, I think the book really is going to be written about 2026 and who gets it right and who gets it wrong, because history indicates that some people do all of those things and you can actually get much bigger gaps. So let's enjoy a season of close racing. Probably a little bit of annoyance between the leading group, George Russell and Max Verstappen, not talking to one another, all
Hmm.
those associated handbags. Carlos Sainz, now GPDA director, but of course driving for Williams. So he can be kind of like that bloke in the bar fight who goes, now, come on, lads, come on, we've all had a drink.
I would definitely buy that book. So then, obviously, you've been on not on the ground so much, but live blogging. I think was it live blogging? You said you were doing the testing.
Yeah.
So looking from what you've seen so far of the MCL 39, bring it back to McLaren. What do you think you would be writing about that if you were writing the book now or in 6 months' time?
Well, it's looking pretty good at the moment. My colleagues who are on the ground in Bahrain had a good look. There's a really nice place that you can go and watch. It's the control tower of the drag strip. You can stand on the roof there and look down on the sort of the turn 9, 10 combination, which is the sort of the fidgety bit before the back straight, which it's what we call a Herman Tilke tripwire, where the famous circuit designer does a fiddly bit of camber change and a fiddly bit of corner combinations in the hope that he prompts drivers to make mistakes. But the best drivers in the world tend not to. However, that little bit there does really trip up the modern generation of ground effect cars because
Mm.
they're heavy. They can sort of lurch ponderously into understeer and head off stage right when the driver's trying to turn left. So you can really get a feel for a car's balance and its poise there. And what people are saying is that the new McLaren turns really well there. In fact, probably turns a little bit too sharply. It's sort of got a bit of a loose back end. And hey, the morning after a kebab, we all have a little bit of that, don't we? So that's something they might have to tame. People who've had a good close look at the car say the front suspension's quite aggressive in its anti-dive geometry, which is interesting. We'll see how that pans out. But of course, it's when you get it out into the field, you see how a car really works and what they have to throw at it if need be to tame any problems. And of course, the floor is the most important aerodynamic component of the modern cars. It's also the hardest and longest thing to build. So if you are wanting to add a new floor to any of these cars this year, you will probably be starting now because that's not something you want to be fiddling with mid-season. So it'd be interesting. I foresee that if I were to do a new version of the McLaren book, I would probably not have to go cap in hand to the publishers again and ask to adjust the entry towards the end of the year. I think they'll be leaving it well alone from sort of May, June onwards.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's fantastic insight there. But I know at the moment it's impossible to predict things that are going to happen because it's such a long season, so many races and so many twists and turns. But I'm going to ask you anyway. So if you would indulge me with, as things stand right now, what you think the Drivers' Championship, Constructors' Championship would be, the boring ones. If you think there's going to be any new winners, who they'll be, and then biggest surprise and disappointment.
Does Lewis Hamilton count as a new winner if he's winning in a Ferrari?
No, it doesn't. But you can put him for the Drivers' Championship if you want.
Well, it's looking like the Ferrari has some issues with tyre degradation at the moment, but always tricky to make big predictions based on testing, especially given how cold and occasionally wet it was in Bahrain, and the combination of the winds chucked a lot of sand onto the surface, which sort of exacerbated what is already quite an aggressive track surface for tyre degradation. So pretty tricky. What we could see was that McLaren seemed to be fast on its race simulations and long runs, didn't really run into any degradation problems. So most people think that McLaren have come out of testing strongest. Red Bull, very difficult to gauge. On the last day, Max Verstappen came out, tried to throw it around a bit. It just looked really hard to drive and nasty. And you could see him on the in-car shots shaking his head. And he didn't even manage a race simulation. So tricky. They come into the season not massively well prepared, but we've seen them silk persiflate a car through the season in the past. So I think, yeah, it's going to be McLaren, Ferrari, not quite shown their hand yet. Mercedes looking okay. Could we see Andrea Kimi Antonelli win a Grand Prix this year? It's a maybe. He's got the speed. He admits that what he needs to do is learn a bit more about tyre management and also putting together a qualifying lap because that is the really tricky thing to do in these cars because when you're on the softest tires available, the balance can migrate through your hot lap, so it's really tricky, and that's something even Lewis Hamilton has struggled to do in the ground effect era. So a lot to learn for Andrea Kimi Antonelli there. Will we see other entrants into the winners' circle? You never know whether you're going to get a weird and wacko race like Monza a few years ago, Hungary a few years ago. Obviously, Valtteri Bottas not on the grid this year, so we can't expect him to cannonball through the field as he did in Hungary a few years back, allowing Esteban Ocon to seize the moment and nip through to win that race. So yeah, who knows? And then the order behind, really tight midfield. It's actually Williams looking pretty good. They launched their car early, which was a big statement from them. Know that the inventory is no longer stored on a 20,000 cell Excel spreadsheet, so they're feeling quite pleased with themselves. All looking quite good there. The steak Sauber, what do they call it? The kick Sauber. I mean, you shouldn't kick a team when it's down, but really, that's looking like a bit of a disaster again, and that's a shame because Gabriel Bortoleto, a really hot property, the F2 champion, was part of McLaren's young driver program, but absolutely rocketed through F2, and they couldn't they didn't have anything to give him. So along came Audi stroke Sauber with their checkbook, and that's placed him. So it will be interesting to see what he does, because you can go from being a hot property to being a net in the space of a few months if you're in a rubbish car, can't you? So yeah, a lot of new faces. Oliver Behrman, we'll see what he can do in the Haas. A few sort of old faces in new places that'll be tricky to get used to. Remember what was the year when Jenson Button drove into the wrong pit in China? Because
Oh,
he drove
yeah.
into the Mercedes pit, didn't
Yes,
he?
he did.
Because
Yeah, that would have been like 2013, something like that, I think, maybe.
yeah, yeah. So we might see a bit of that. Are we confident enough to predict it? Maybe. So yeah, it'd be interesting. And then Australia, first race of the year, and traditionally a bit of an outlier because it's not a circuit that has much in common with others. So could throw up a random result. It'd be very interesting.
Nice. That's very insightful. It's that's far more depth than I expected. So thank you for that. So fast forward then 12 months. I've got one more question I want to ask you, and this is just another hypothetical. The end of this turbo hybrid era at the end of this season. So if you're asked to write a book about anything in the turbo hybrid era, what would you pick? Would you just do an oversight of the entire sort of 2014 to 2025, or would you pick a specific subject to narrow down into and deep dive?
Well, it's a tricky one. I do have somewhere in my collection a really abstruse tome that I bought secondhand, which was all about the previous turbo era. And it goes into really ridiculous detail. You've got the water injection in the Ferraris and things like that. Literally gives you a headache reading it. I probably wouldn't do anything as in depth as that, but I think you would probably want to take an overall view of it and ask if it was a particularly good idea to begin with, because where are we at? So it's 2014, the rules came in. They were talking about it from about 2010 onwards. And of course, at the time, everyone was fascinated about downsizing and the power of e-turbos. That is, the bit of the heat reclamation that spins the turbo up so you don't get lag. And that turned out to be the hardest bit to engineer. And actually, they've given up on that in the road car applications. And they've also given up on it in Formula One because that's being struck out of the regulations next season. So I suppose it would be interesting, probably more of a magazine feature to audit how much cost and how much R&D effort has been splurged pointlessly. Honda taking years and years publicly getting it wrong before they got it right. Is that worthy of a book? Maybe not. Who were the big winners of the turbo hybrid era? It's been almost a game of two halves, hasn't it? You've had the first bit Mercedes, the second bit Honda, and really Renault, such massive losers from it that they've had to stop building their own engines. So that, I think, is the sad final chapter of that book if we were to write one. The pioneers of turbocharging limping away from the field, waving a white flag.
Yeah, I mean, I for one, I've been quite happy with the turbo hybrid era. I think it's done some good things. I think it was reacting to what it needed to do at the time, and it has helped Formula One grow to where it is now.
Yeah.
I don't think it would have had the coverage it
Yeah.
did if we were still running V10s and V8s. But
And I've not gone deaf because I'll tell you this: the a V8 at maximum revs just actually makes your head vibrate. Even if you've got earplugs in, it can burn your eardrums out from the inside out.
yes, as one of those people that would take macho pride of standing on the hangar straight right by the barrier with no earplugs in, waiting for the V10s to go past. And yeah, I only did that a couple of times, but
You'd have been like the grandma in a lower low by
yeah.
now with the ear trumpet. Yeah,
But
do
yeah,
this to your mother.
it was like a badge of honor. But fortunately, my hearing is still fine, and that I think is a lot down to these V6 turbo hybrids. So yes, but thank you so much for joining us today and last week as well. It's been really great chatting to you. So, is there anyone anyone that you want to plug, or anything you want, any projects you want to plug on this podcast before we wrap up?
Well, after you've bought my book, buy Luke Two Agent Smith's book on the Grid, which is a really, really fantastic book. I've got somewhere behind me, I've got an autographed copy of it because I actually bought one. I didn't go cap in hand for a PDF or anything like that. Yes, this that's pretty good. What else? Do read my nonsense and the nonsense of my colleagues on autosport.com and motorsport.com this year. The content being differentiated. So I'm going to be writing different things for different websites, which is a bit bizarre. I'll try and get my head around that. I haven't yet. And of course, Autosport magazine, now a monthly, which will have some of my stuff in. I've written about Formula One's first big car rivalry for the next issue.
Fantastic. Yeah, I'm slightly disappointed that the GP Racing magazine now folded. Obviously, so there'll be no more Flat Chat podcast, which I very much enjoyed when that came out.
You know, you'll be having me on the Autosport podcast and also our infamous daily wrap-up videos from Grand Prix. I actually, in our little interregnum of recording, I got our rota for the first bit of the year, and I'll be doing Bahrain. So that will
Excellent.
be my first suitcase packing outing of the season.
Not too long to wait then. Fantastic. Well, on that note, I think we'll shut down. So once again, thank you so much for joining us today, and hopefully speak to you soon.
Thank you.
Well, I really enjoyed that conversation with Stuart. He was an absolute gent. He was really fun to be around, and he was very, very understanding when we had the tech issues. Absolute panic when just everything just shut down. Internet was gone. No internet for 5 days. That was a very trying time. But Stuart, we maintaining contact over email. He was very, very accommodating, and we just kept pushing back until he was finished with testing, and then I had internet back. So that was great and thoroughly enjoyable. But if you enjoyed this podcast, we would love it if you could take 5 to leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or a 5-star rating on Spotify to help us climb the rankings there. Be sure to follow us on social media at Grid Talk UK. And if you are feeling extra generous, please consider supporting us on Patreon for exclusive access and behind the scenes content. And also, if you're one of those people who are not subscribed to our channel, please consider subscribing. You get a notification to know when we're live, so you don't miss a show. And there's lots of content on there that we are currently building as well. Grid Talk is available on YouTube, where most episodes are recorded live, as well as Amazon Fire, Spotify, Apple Music, Verbal, and Pocket Casts. So until the next Fireside Chat, I've been Tom Horrox. See you soon.